In this video, I'm going to be explaining the Technifibre line of rackets as I have come to understand them after working in a tennis retail store for the past 8+ years, as well as gaining my MRT certification, which stands for Master Racket Technician, which is essentially a fancy way of saying I took a test here in the United States that goes over racket technology, string technology, and how those are going to affect your game when you actually play with them. So how I'm going to do this is that I'll go through and I'll show you what the 3 big main tennis racket lines from Technifibre are, and then I'll go through what they're going to help you with, as well as what the different versions of the rackets are, and why you may want to consider using one of these rackets the next time you go out and actually demo something. So with that being said, let's get started. So the reason for this video actually came from someone that commented in my live stream that I do here on the channel almost nightly. If you don't know, I do live stream or go live here on YouTube almost every night, and I've been doing that for at least half an hour, and my goal and commitment is to do that for at least half an hour every single day for the rest of 2025. So if you do ever have a tennis gear related question that you want answered by me live and semi in person, because I'll be there and you can see me. I may not necessarily be able to hear you though, just because we're on a live stream. But please, by all means, do come join us. We'd love to have you. And eventually the tennis talk is going to subside at some point. We'll all just kind of like hang out and have fun. But if you have a very specific question you want my help with, please, by all means, join the live stream. I'll be happy to help and happy to talk with you as well. So the original comment that came up in the live stream was, what is the difference between 2 of the big 3 Technifibre racket lines? And I was like, okay, these 2 are probably the more common ones. Most people don't necessarily know about or don't really care about the third one, but I wanted to at least make this video so that way you can understand what all of them are going to do in order to help give you and help you make the best decision possible the next time you go to demo rackets, and to make sure you know what all of your options are from Technifibre, just because they are making such a bigger and bigger name for themselves, and they are becoming a little bit more of a actually extremely big contender in the racket market. So with that being said, let's start with the very first racket. So the very first line of rackets that we're going to be talking about, this is the one that most people don't necessarily know about. They probably haven't seen as much unless you're more so in Europe. That's where the new version of this racket was released. Here in the States, we didn't really get it that often or really that much at all. And that is going to be the TFX1. Then with the TFX1, what this is designed to help you with is that this is designed to help you with power and spin. Compared to most other Technifibre rackets, the TFX1 is predominantly going to be the very easiest in generating power and generating spin in itself. And then you do have, for the TFX1, you have the 300 version, you have the 305, which essentially think of like the Babolat Pure Drive 98 when you're thinking about the 305 from the TFX1. You have the 285, you have the 275, which is actually a 105 head size. Interesting. Then you have a 270, as well as a 255. Now, if you don't know what those numbers means, these are all the weights of the TFX1. These are all the weights in grams when they are unstrung. Cool. So, like I was mentioning with the TFX1 line, how it is designed to help with power and spin, these rackets from Technifibre, they are typically going to be the rackets with the thickest beam. So by having a thicker beam or just having the racket be a much larger racket in general, whereas the other 2 racket lines that we'll get to, those are going to be thinner than the TFX ones. The thicker racket beam itself, that's going to help give the ball a little bit more power. It's also going to make these rackets a little bit stiffer. So because they are a little bit stiffer, you do have to be a little bit more careful with them being a little bit harder on your arm and potentially causing tennis elbow slightly more than, say, the next 2 lines that we are going to talk about. However, Technifibre does tend to be pretty good about putting foam into their rackets. I know they've done it on the next 2. I'm not as sure as if they've done it with the TFX1, just because here in the US, the TFX1, we did not get version 2 of it, or at least wherever I am at here in the US, we did not get version 2 of it, so I have not got to necessarily play with that one. However, it is usually going to be Technifibre's answer to rackets like I mentioned, the Babolat Pure Drive 98, if you look at the 305 gram version of the TFX1, or if you're looking at the others, the 300, the 285, the 270, those are predominantly going to be counter to, say, something like the Babolat Pure Drive, say something like the Wilson Ultra. That tends to be where this racket likes to fall. And because it is a little bit more of an open string pattern to not only help with power, that's where you also get a little bit more of the help with spin, because these strings are actually spaced out a little bit more compared to the 16 by 19 in some of the rackets we'll mention later from the other two lines. I know I'm talking about the other two lines quite a bit often without saying their names, but those are the two you're probably going to know more about already, so you can pretty much guess where we're going to go next. But with that being said, the TFX ones, they do well if you are able to try them. So if you're looking for a power racket that's going to help you with a little bit more spin, I would definitely give these ones a demo. But besides that, if you're wanting a little bit more help with control, that's where the next two come in, which we're going to talk about now. The second one is the T-Fight from Technifibre. This is designed to help you with control and a little bit of power. I know that seems counterintuitive, but let me explain. So the T-Fight, you have the 315S, you have the 305S, which is an 18 by 19 string pattern. You have the 300S, which is a 98 16 by 19. You have the 300, which is a 100 16 by 19, as well as you have the 285, which is a 100 16 by 19. You have the 270, which is a 100 16 by 19 as well. And then you also have the 255, which is the same thing. You probably guessed it, a 100 square inch head size with a 16 by 19 string pattern. Okay, the T-Fights from Technifibre, arguably the most popular Technifibre line of rackets that is out right now. You have most of the players that you see on the tour actually playing with these, such as Daniil Medvedev, Iga Swiatek, Alexander Bublik. You also have Christopher Eubanks, but he just retired at the time of making this video. It was like really recent. I think it was like a few days ago. But yeah, the T-Fight is probably the most versatile lineup that Technifibre does have, just because, as I said on the board, it's designed to help with control and power. Now, usually those two things don't go together when you're talking about rackets. Usually they don't. The T-Fight, however, is a pretty good blend of the two things. Kind of think of like the EZone 98, whereas the EZone 98 is more so a power racket that is trying to help give you a little bit more control by having the smaller head size. The T-Fight is trying to be a control racket, in my opinion, that is trying to give you a little bit more power. And the reason I say that is because with the T-Fight lines, you do have so many different variations in how you can actually customize this or whatever you want the T-Fight to do for your game specifically. So if you want the control racket to help give you just a little bit more power, that's where you're typically looking at, like if you're comparing to the EZone 98, you're typically looking at the 300S with the 98 head size and the 16 by 19 string pattern. Or if you want to compare it to a little bit of a more powerful version, you can go with the 300, just the normal 300, which is a 100 square inch head size and a 16 by 19 string pattern. You can kind of mix and match with all of these. Now, Technifibre was able to make these rackets, even though they're control rackets, a little bit stiffer, where you're helping to get some of that extra power from, because they do have the foam in their handles, like I mentioned with the TFX ones. So not only is there foam inside the actual racket of the T-Fight, but it is going to help decrease some of that shock and vibration before it gets back into your arm or wrist, causing tennis elbow. And that's something that we all can appreciate. Now, whether you like the feeling of the actual Technifibre handle, that is up to you. Some people can't stand the palette. Some people absolutely love it. But you have a way to try a bunch of different weights, all the way down from 255 grams unstrung, which is quite low. I don't know what that is off the top of my head, just because I typically work in ounces, but it's very low. And then you can go all the way up to an extremely heavy racket, which is about 315 grams unstrung, being the 315S, which is also a 98 head size and a 16 by 19 string pattern. But you're trying to help bank on getting a little bit more power just from the actual weight of the racket itself too, and how much force and mass you'll be using when you actually swing that beast of a stick. And then of course you have the 305S, which is the one that Daniel Medvedev endorses. You have the 18 by 19 string pattern. So instead of just being a little bit more like extremely nothing but control, kind of like the next line of rackets we'll talk about, the 18 by 19, that one cross at the bottom instead of it being an 18 by 20, that is going to help give you a little bit more spin, a little bit more power on the T-Fight line. And the 305S is going to be about the same weight as your typical control rackets. So it's just an easy way for you to get in, see if you even like a more controlled oriented version of a T-Fight, and see what you think. But with the T-Fights, if these are too powerful for you and you really want something that's just going to give you the most control, and you as the player have to generate all of the power, all the spin on your own, but you are really going to be able to just deflect your opponent's power and place the ball wherever you want onto the court and have a much easier time doing it, then that's where the next line of rackets we're going to talk about comes in. And then finally, we have all the way over here, we have the TF40s. And this one helps specifically just with control. That is about it. I ran out of board space. Oh no. So then over here with the TF40, you have the 315 in the 16 by 19. Yep, the 315 16 by 19. You have the 305 in a 16 by 19, a 305 in an 18 by 20, as well as you have a 290 for the TF40, and finally, you have a 315 18 by 20. Ta-da! Finally, the Technifibre TF40s. I have to personally say, in my opinion, the TF40 305 16 by 19 is probably one of the most slept on rackets that is out there right now. I personally really enjoyed it, and I think if more people tried it, especially when they're demoing rackets such as the Wilson Blade 98 16 by 19, the Head Gravity Tour, the Babolat Pure Strike 16 by 19, the Solinco Whiteout 305, I think if people tried the TF40 305, they would have a very fun time, just because it plays very well. And like I said a little bit earlier, this racket is designed to help you with nothing but control. So if you've been playing for quite a while and you really can just generate all the power, all the spin, everything you need on your own from your technique and just your swing as well, that's where I think the TF40 can really shine, because you have a very easy racket to just help you with that. And if you want to go even further than the 16 by 19 305, you can do the 305 and the 18 by 20. If you want the racket to be even more stable for you, you can go with the heavier weights, being the 315s. And if you want a little bit more help with power and spin, you go with the 315 16 by 19. If you want a little bit more help with control, you go with the 315 18 by 20. The TF40s, my opinion, very underrated rackets from Tecnifibre. I think more people would enjoy trying them. And they do technically have that 290 there, which I believe is also a 98 16 by 19, even though I didn't write it on the board. But I think with this racket, if you're going to use it, you're probably not someone that is going to be using a 290. You're probably someone that's been wanting the extra stability that this racket can offer in the heavier weights, especially if you're used to something like a Wilson Blade or anything like that. So TF40, definitely think it's worth a demo if you want the most help with control from the Technifibre line of rackets. And if you just want to try something that's different, because the TF40 also does have the foam in the racket as well, I believe, which is going to help decrease some of that risk of tennis elbow and shock and vibration getting back to you, just like the others in the line itself. And that is pretty much all I got to say about the TF40. So, should be good. Now, the whole reason and the whole idea for this video, like I mentioned earlier, came from a comment that someone asked me in one of my live streams that I was doing. And the question was basically, what is the main differences between the T-Fight and the TF40? Now, the way they phrased it, they were asking a little bit more in terms of seeing why the T-Fight 305S, the 18x19 version, how that would compare to some of the TF40s. But just in general, I figured that this would be a very, very good video to make, just to give you a brief breakdown of what the three main lines are going to do and what you may want to be looking into if you are thinking of changing rackets to a Technifibre or at least trying one. The T-Fights, like I said, being a little bit more control and power oriented. These ones are going to be the most versatile and the most well-rounded racket from all of the T-Fight lines, especially when you compare it to the TF40. The TFX1 kind of stays in its lane as being the power and spin racket. It's very good at doing that. But if you're looking for control, you do technically have the 305 version. However, it's probably not as common and you're probably not going to see it as much just because this racket is mainly focusing on the power and spin side. Not necessarily going to be the best at trying to give you that control that you're looking for. That's where the entire other two rackets come in. And then TF40, exact opposite end of the spectrum. You have most control that you can possibly get out of these. The T-Fight 305S, the 18x19, does start to dip into the TF40 category in terms of the control you're going to get because of the more dense string pattern. However, you can very easily just slot in the 305 18x20 in the TF40 and you outpace the control you're going to get from the T-Fight regardless. As well as, I didn't really go much into the beam not necessarily the beam thickness, but the way the beam is constructed in these rackets. That does play a factor in it too. The T-Fight is a little bit more rounded, so it is going to help give you a little bit more of that force and that push, kind of like the TFX1 is, whereas the TF40 is more almost of a box beam pattern to where it's going to be a little bit more control oriented, but that's a little bit more advanced, and we're not going to dive extremely deep into that because this is a brief overview of the Technifibre rackets and just to give you an idea of what you may want to try if you do ever want to demo one. So with that being said, if you like the video, leave a like on it. It does help me out a lot, as well as subscribe to the channel so we can grow this channel and get the information out there from the people that have it to the people that need it. And definitely comment below if you've tried a Technifibre racket or if you use a Technifibre racket. What are you using? Why do you like it? I'd love to know. And finally, come join me on one of my live streams. I would love to meet you. I'd love to talk tennis with you. If you have a tennis gear related question, by all means, I'll be ready and happy to answer as much as I can and help you out as much as possible. And if you are wanting to join, I'm typically going live around 8:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. And I'll be doing that for at least half an hour for the rest of the year of 2025. So if you can make it out, I'd love to see you there. I'd love to chat with you and answer any question you may have at the time. So, with that being said, as always, take care.